There is a wall inside you, not a metaphor, not a poetic device, a real, living, breathing wall, and it has been there longer than you can remember. You have felt it. I know you have. That moment when you decide, truly decide, that this time will be different. This time you will start the business, finish the book, have the conversation you have been avoiding for 3 years, fix what is broken, become who you know you are capable of being. And for a moment the decision feels so clean, so clear, so certain, that you almost laugh at how simple it is. Of course, this is what I must do. Why did it take me so long to see it? And then morning comes, or Monday comes, or the moment of execution arrives, the moment where decision must become action, and something happens. Not a dramatic collapse, not a crisis, just a quiet, almost polite resistance, a heaviness in the chest, a sudden awareness of every reason it might not work, a strange magnetic pull back toward everything familiar, everything safe, everything exactly as it has always been. I remember the first time I named that feeling for what it truly was. I was 34 years old, sitting at a desk covered in notes and half-finished pages, having promised myself again that today was the day I would push through. And I sat there for 2 hours, completely still, not lazy, not distracted, paralyzed. And what terrified me most was not that I had not moved. What terrified me was that I did not know why. That is the wall, and here is what nobody tells you about it. The wall is not made of your circumstances. It is not built from lack of time, lack of money, lack of opportunity. Those are the stories we tell ourselves because they are easier to say out loud. The wall is made of something far more intimate, far more personal, and therefore far more difficult to admit. It is made of you, of the part of you that has decided, somewhere below the level of conscious thought, that moving forward is more dangerous than standing still. Now I need you to hear me on this, because this next part is where most people get it wrong. Most people, when they encounter this wall, conclude that something is wrong with them, that they are broken, or weak, or fundamentally undisciplined in a way that other people are not. They look at the men and women who seem to move through life with momentum and they think, what do they have that I don't? What is missing in me? And that question, as natural as it feels, is the wrong question. It leads you in the wrong direction every single time. Because the wall is not evidence of a deficiency. The wall is evidence of intelligence. Your nervous system built that wall on purpose. It built it to protect you. The problem is not that the wall exists. The problem is that the wall was built using old information that is no longer accurate, no longer relevant, and no longer serving the life you are trying to create. Let me tell you something about the nature of protection. When I was a child, I learned very early that certain kinds of visibility were dangerous. Not physically dangerous, but socially, emotionally dangerous in the way that only a child's world can make something feel like survival. Speaking up too loudly, wanting too much, reaching too far. These things brought a particular kind of response from the world around me that taught my system a very clear lesson. Stay small. Stay manageable. Stay within the acceptable range. I was not aware of learning that lesson. Nobody sat me down and said, Emmett, smallness is safety. The lesson arrived through repetition, through 100 small moments that collectively trained my nervous system to equate ambition with danger. And so my system did what all intelligent systems do. It built a wall, a beautiful, efficient, protective wall. And for years that wall served me perfectly, until it didn't. Until the life I was meant to live started pressing against it from the other side. Here is what I want you to sit with right now. Not think about analytically, but genuinely feel. What is the thing you keep returning to? The goal, the dream, the version of yourself that refuses to go away no matter how many times you push it aside. You know what it is. It has probably visited you this week, maybe this morning. It does not come loudly, it comes quietly, almost shyly, like something that has learned to knock softly because it has been turned away so many times before. That thing, that persistent returning vision, is on the other side of your wall, and the wall is not going to fall because you want it to badly enough. The wall is not going to fall because you find the right motivational video or the right morning routine or the right productivity system. I have tried all of those things. I have tried them with genuine commitment, with real effort, with everything I had, and the wall stood, because I was attacking the symptoms without understanding the source. What I discovered, what took me years of failure and searching and sitting in the uncomfortable darkness of my own limitations to find, is that there is a specific knowledge required to bypass mental resistance, not overcome it, not destroy it, bypass it. Work with the intelligence that built the wall rather than against it. That knowledge is what I am here to share with you. But first you need to understand what you are actually dealing with, not the surface version, not the simplified self-help version. The real architecture of what is happening inside you every single time you approach the edge of your potential and feel that wall rising up to meet you, because you cannot bypass what you do not understand. And understanding, real understanding, the kind that lands in your body and not just your mind, is always the beginning. So let's begin. Most people have it completely backwards. They think resistance is the opposite of progress. They think it shows up to block them, to punish them, to prove that they are not ready, not worthy, not capable of the life they are reaching for. And because they believe that, they spend enormous energy fighting it, white-knuckling through it, shaming themselves past it, forcing their way forward through sheer aggression toward their own inner experience. And then they wonder why they are exhausted, why the progress never feels sustainable, why every breakthrough seems to be followed by a collapse back to the starting line. Here is what I know to be true after decades of studying the human mind, not in libraries alone, though I have spent considerable time there, but in the laboratory of my own life, my own failures, my own repeated encounters with the invisible ceiling that kept pressing me back down every time I tried to rise. Resistance is not your enemy. Resistance is your oldest, most loyal protector. And the moment you genuinely understand that, not as a concept, but as a lived truth, everything changes. Let me walk you through the architecture. Let me show you exactly what is being built inside you, and why, and how it works. Your brain, at its core, is a prediction machine. This is not poetry, this is neuroscience. Every experience you have ever had has been cataloged, weighted, and filed into an enormous internal database that your nervous system consults constantly, automatically, and largely without your awareness. Every time you prepare to take an action, especially a new action, a bold action, an action that carries the possibility of failure or judgment or loss, your brain runs a search through that database and asks a single, ruthlessly practical question. Based on everything that has happened before, is this safe? Not good. Not worthy. Not important. And if the database returns enough entries tagged with pain, rejection, failure, humiliation, or loss, even if those entries are 30 years old, even if they came from a version of you that was 8 years old and had no context and no power and no ability to accurately interpret what was happening, your nervous system fires a response, a chemical cascade, a tightening, a withdrawal. What we experience consciously as resistance. I want you to let that land for a moment. The resistance you feel today, right now in your life, toward the goals that matter most to you, may be powered entirely by data collected before you were 10 years old. You are being governed by a child's conclusions about a world that no longer exists. And your adult self, with all its wisdom and capability and genuine desire for growth, is being overruled by a filing system that has not been updated in decades. That is the architecture. That is what you are dealing with. Now, I remember when I first understood this, truly understood it, not just intellectually, but in my bones. I was working through a period in my life where every morning began with intention and every evening ended with a quiet, humiliating awareness that I had once again not done the thing I had promised myself I would do. Not because I lacked desire, not because I lacked knowledge of what needed to be done, but because every time I sat down to do it, something rose up from inside me that I can only describe as a full-body no, and I started to get curious about that no. Instead of fighting it, instead of calling myself weak and pushing harder, I got genuinely scientifically curious. I started asking, where did this come from? What is this protecting me from? What does my system believe will happen if I move forward? What I found shocked me. Underneath the resistance, buried beneath layers of adult reasoning and sophisticated self-narrative, was a belief so old and so simple that it almost seemed too small to be causing this much damage. The belief was this: if you become too much, you will lose the people you love. If you succeed beyond a certain point, you will become unrecognizable to your own tribe. You will be alone on the other side of your achievement. That belief had been installed in me by a specific set of experiences in early childhood, experiences that were real, experiences that, at the time, genuinely required that response. But I was not that child anymore. The world I was navigating was not that world anymore. And yet the filing system had never been updated. The old data was still running the show. Ask yourself right now, and I mean genuinely ask, not rhetorically, but with real searching honesty. What does your resistance believe will happen if you break through? Not what you believe consciously, what your system believes. What is the catastrophe your nervous system is convinced is waiting for you on the other side of your breakthrough? For some of you, it is failure, the humiliation of trying fully and being seen to fall short. For some of you, it is success, the unfamiliar territory of a life larger than the one you were given permission to inhabit. For some of you, it is exposure, being fully seen, fully known, and found somehow to be not enough after all. Every single one of those fears is legitimate. Every single one of them was born from a real experience. And every single one of them is being applied to a present moment it does not fit. This is why information alone does not set you free. This is why knowing what to do, and most of you know exactly what to do, is not the same as being able to do it. The gap between knowing and doing is not a knowledge gap. It is a safety gap. Your system does not yet believe that moving forward is safe. And until that changes, all the motivation in the world will only take you so far before the wall rises again. There is one more layer to this architecture that I need you to understand, because it is the layer that makes resistance so deceptively difficult to spot. Resistance is almost never experienced directly. It does not announce itself as fear. It arrives disguised. It comes dressed as procrastination, as perfectionism, as sudden exhaustion, as the urgent need to reorganize your workspace before you can begin, as the compelling logic of why right now is not quite the right time. It is a master of disguise, and it has to be, because if you recognized it immediately for what it was, you would see through it. So it borrows your own voice. It thinks in your own language. It makes arguments that sound completely reasonable, and by the time you realize what happened, the day is gone and the wall is still standing. Knowing this changes everything. Because now, when you feel the procrastination, the perfectionism, the sudden and overwhelming need for more preparation before you can possibly begin, you can look at it differently. You can say, I see you, I know what you are, and I know where you came from. That recognition, that moment of clear seeing, is the first crack in the wall. And in the cracks is where everything begins. Somewhere along the way, someone told you that the answer was willpower. Push harder, want it more, dig deeper. Grit your teeth and force yourself through the resistance until it breaks. And if you cannot do that, if the wall does not fall under the pressure of your determinations, then the problem is you, your weakness, your lack of discipline, your insufficient hunger for the life you claim to want. I believed that lie for a long time, longer than I am comfortable admitting, and it cost me years, real years. Years spent in a cycle of explosive effort followed by devastating collapse, followed by shame, followed by recovery, followed by another explosive effort, each cycle leaving me slightly more depleted than the last, slightly more convinced, in the place I rarely let myself look directly, that maybe the wall was not the problem, maybe I was. Let me tell you about a specific season of my life that I have never fully described in public before, because it requires a level of honesty that still makes me uncomfortable. There was a period, roughly 3 years, though it felt like a decade, where I was absolutely convinced that the only thing standing between me and the life I wanted was effort. Pure, sustained, brutal effort. So I applied it. I built systems. I created accountability structures. I woke earlier. I eliminated distractions with a kind of ferocious discipline that people around me genuinely admired. And for stretches of time it worked. Gloriously, intoxicatingly worked. I would feel the momentum building, feel myself moving through the wall by sheer force, and I would think, finally, I have cracked the code. Finally, I have become the person who does not flinch. And then, without exception, without a single variation in the pattern across 3 full years, I would crash. Not gently, catastrophically. Every system I had built would collapse simultaneously. Every habit I had cultivated would evaporate overnight, and I would find myself back at zero, staring at the wall, more exhausted than before and increasingly unable to explain to myself what kept happening. You know what the worst part was? The shame. Not the failure itself. I could have lived with the failure if I had understood it, but I did not understand it. I was doing everything I had been told to do. I was applying maximum willpower. I was pushing with everything I had, and it was not working. Which meant, according to the logic I had been given, that I was not enough, that something fundamental was missing in me that was present in others. That shame is a particular kind of poison, because it does not just hurt, it reinforces the wall. Every time you try with everything you have and still fall short, your nervous system files another data point. Forward motion leads to failure, leads to pain, and the wall gets thicker. Here is the truth about willpower that nobody in the motivation industry wants to say plainly because it is not a particularly sellable message. Willpower is a resource, a finite, depletable, exhaustible resource. Research has demonstrated this with remarkable consistency. The capacity for self-regulation that we call willpower operates like a muscle, and like a muscle it fatigues. Every decision you make, every impulse you resist, every moment you force yourself to act against your default pull draws from the same limited reservoir. This means that the strategy of just try harder is not just ineffective, it is actively counterproductive when applied to deep structural resistance. Because the harder you push against a wall built by your nervous system, the more threat signals you generate. And the more threat signals your system detects, the more resources it allocates to defense. You are not breaking through the wall by forcing it. You are teaching your system that the wall needs to be stronger. I want to be careful here, because I am not telling you that effort does not matter. Effort matters enormously. Sustained, committed, courageous effort is non-negotiable in any meaningful life. What I am saying is that effort applied in the wrong direction, effort used as a battering ram against a wall that requires a key, not a battering ram, is effort wasted. And worse, it is effort that builds shame, depletes your reserves, and makes the next attempt harder than the last. Think about someone you know, maybe yourself, who has tried to make a significant change through pure willpower, a health transformation, a career shift, a relationship pattern they knew they needed to break. and think about how the story usually goes. The initial surge of motivation, the early progress, the plateau, the slip, the recovery attempt, the final collapse, and then the conclusion, conscious or not, that this particular change is simply not available to me, that I am someone who cannot do this thing. That conclusion is almost never accurate, but it feels completely accurate because the evidence is real. The failure happened. The evidence is sitting right there, undeniable, in the personal history of every single attempt. What the evidence actually proves is not that the change is impossible. What it proves is that willpower alone is the wrong tool for this particular job. And using the wrong tool does not tell you anything about your capability. It tells you something about your strategy. Ask yourself honestly right now, how many times have you attempted the same breakthrough using the same approach and expected a different result? Not because you are foolish, you are not foolish, but because you were given a limited toolkit and told it was complete. You were handed willpower and told it was the master key. And every time it failed, you blamed the hand holding the key rather than questioning whether the key itself was right for this lock. Here is what I eventually discovered, and what I need you to hear clearly because it is the pivot on which everything else in this conversation turns. The way through mental resistance is not force. It is understanding. It is not pressure. It is precision. It is not the brute application of more energy in the same direction. It is the intelligent redirection of energy based on a deep, accurate reading of what is actually happening inside you. Willpower is not useless, but it is a surface tool. It operates at the level of behavior, of action, of conscious choice. And mental resistance does not live at that level. It lives deeper. It lives in the part of you that decides, before your conscious mind has even woken up, whether today is a day you move forward or a day you stay still. To reach that level, you need something other than force. You need knowledge, a very specific kind of knowledge. The kind that does not just tell you what to do, but fundamentally changes what feels possible, what feels safe, and what your system genuinely believes about the world you are moving into. That knowledge has a name. It has a structure. It has 7 distinct components. And the 7th, the one most people never reach, the one that makes all the others finally work, is what I have come to call the 7th Axiom. And we are about to go there together. Every system of knowledge has axioms, foundational truths that do not require proof because everything else is built upon them. Remove the axioms and the entire structure collapses. Keep them intact and the structure can bear enormous weight, the weight of challenge, of failure, of uncertainty, of the kind of pressure that breaks people who do not have a solid foundation beneath them. Over the course of my life, through study, through failure, through the long and often painful process of watching myself and others navigate the terrain between who we are and who we are capable of becoming, I identified 7 such axioms. 7 foundational truths about the human mind and its relationship to change, to growth, to the specific experience of pressing against your own ceiling and trying to break through. The first 6 are powerful. They matter. They have genuine transformative weight. But I noticed something strange and consistent across every person I encountered, every story I heard, every breakthrough and collapse I witnessed. People could hold the first 6 axioms clearly, understand them deeply, even teach them to others, and still find themselves pinned to the wall when it counted most. Still find that the knowledge, however clear and however earnestly believed, did not translate into the sustained forward motion they were reaching for. And I kept asking myself, why? What is the missing piece? What is the variable that separates the person who understands transformation from the person who actually transforms? The answer, when it finally came to me, was so simple that I almost dismissed it. It arrived not in a moment of dramatic revelation, but in a quiet afternoon, sitting in a garden, watching a man try to open a gate. He had the right key. I could see it in his hand, the correct key for that specific lock. But he was inserting it at the wrong angle, and he was frustrated, and he was pushing harder with each failed attempt, and the gate was not opening, and finally, out of sheer exhaustion, he paused. He looked at the key. He looked at the lock. He tilted his wrist by perhaps 15 degrees, and the gate swung open as if it had never been locked at all. The 7th axiom is the correct angle. Here it is, plainly and completely. The knowledge required to bypass mental resistance is not knowledge about what to do. It is knowledge about what you are. Not what you are capable of, though that matters. Not what you deserve, though that matters too. But what you fundamentally, essentially, unchangeably are at the level of your deepest nature. And the specific knowledge I am pointing to is this: you are not your resistance. You are the awareness in which resistance arises. And that distinction, that single, seemingly subtle distinction, is the difference between a life spent fighting your own mind and a life spent moving freely within it. Let me make this concrete, because I refuse to leave this in the realm of abstraction. Abstraction has never freed anyone. Truth has to land in the body to be useful. When resistance arises, when that wall rises up inside you and the heaviness comes and the 1,000 reasonable arguments for staying still begin to assemble themselves, something is observing that process. Something in you is watching the resistance happen. That something is not the resistance. It cannot be, because the observer and the observed are never the same thing. You cannot simultaneously be the storm and the eye of the storm. You are always, in every moment, the awareness watching the weather of your own mind. That awareness, that watching presence, is what you actually are. I remember the morning this stopped being a concept for me and became an experience. I was sitting with a particularly intense wave of resistance, the kind that feels like it has weight, like it is pressing you physically into the ground. And instead of fighting it, instead of trying to push through it or argue my way past it, I did something different. I simply noticed it. I said, not out loud, but inwardly, clearly, I am aware that resistance is present, and something shifted, not dramatically, not like a thunderclap, but distinctly. The resistance did not disappear, but my relationship to it changed completely. Because I had in that moment stepped into the position of observer rather than combatant. And from the position of observer, the resistance had no authority over me. This is the 7th axiom in practice. Not the elimination of resistance, that is neither possible nor desirable. Resistance, as we established, is intelligent, it is protective, it carries information. The goal is never to silence it. The goal is to stop being governed by it, and you cannot stop being governed by something you are identified with. You can only stop being governed by something you can observe. Now here is where the axiom becomes truly powerful, truly generative, truly the kind of knowledge that changes the entire game. Once you can observe your resistance rather than inhabit it, you gain access to something extraordinary. You gain access to the information inside it. The resistance begins to speak to you rather than simply block you. And what it says, when you are calm enough, grounded enough, rooted enough in the observer position to actually hear it, is always some version of, I am afraid of this specific thing. And I built this wall to protect you from that specific thing. And if you can show me that we are safe, I will stand aside. That conversation, that internal dialogue between your aware self and your protective resistance, is what the 7th axiom makes possible. And it is a conversation that willpower alone can never initiate, because willpower approaches resistance as an enemy to be defeated. The 7th axiom approaches resistance as a frightened protector to be understood. And frightened protectors do not respond to force, they respond to safety. They respond to genuine understanding. They respond to the experience of being seen, heard, and reassured by someone they trust. You are the someone they trust. Your aware self, the observer, the watcher, the steady presence that has been there through every storm your life has produced, is the only voice your resistance will genuinely listen to. And when you speak to it from that place, with that authority, with that calm and genuine recognition of what it has been trying to do for you all these years, something remarkable happens. The wall does not just crack, it begins, slowly and then suddenly, to become a door. And doors, unlike walls, are made to be opened. Doors exist for passage. Doors are an invitation. What waits beyond that door is the entire conversation that remains. But before we can walk through it, we need to go deeper into the mechanism that keeps most people locked on the wrong side. The identity trap that feeds resistance its most powerful fuel and makes the wall feel not just solid but permanent. Because you cannot bypass what you do not fully see. And there is one more layer of this that needs to be fully seen. Before I explain the identity trap, I want you to do something. Not think, do. Right now, in this moment, complete this sentence in your mind without editing, without filtering, without choosing the answer that sounds best. Just notice the first thing that arrives. I am someone who... Whatever came up, hold it. Because that completion, that automatic, unexamined response is running your life far more powerfully than any goal you have ever set, any plan you have ever made, any decision you have ever committed to with total sincerity. That sentence is not a description of you, it is a prescription. It is a set of operating instructions that your entire system, your thoughts, your behaviors, your choices, your responses to opportunity and threat, is constantly working to fulfill. And here is the trap. If that sentence, in any of its many forms, contains the word can't, if it contains someone who struggles with, if it contains not the kind of person who, if anywhere inside your identity architecture there lives a story about your limitations that you have been carrying so long it no longer feels like a story, it feels like a fact, then your resistance has its fuel source. And it will never run dry. This is the identity trap, and it is the most sophisticated, most invisible, most ruthlessly effective mechanism that mental resistance uses to maintain its power over you. Here is why it works so devastatingly well. The human mind has one non-negotiable prime directive that overrides almost every other impulse: be consistent with your identity, not be happy. Not be successful, not be free. Be consistent. Your nervous system experiences identity inconsistency, the gap between who you believe yourself to be and what you are doing in any given moment, as a genuine threat, a physiological alarm. And it will work tirelessly, creatively, and with remarkable intelligence to close that gap, to pull your behavior back into alignment with your self-concept, regardless of whether that self-concept is serving you. Think about what this means in practical terms. You set a goal. The goal requires you to behave in ways that are inconsistent with your current identity. Your system detects the inconsistency. Your system fires resistance. You experience the resistance as laziness, or fear, or distraction, or sudden exhaustion, or 100 other disguises. You interpret the resistance as evidence that you are not ready, not capable, not disciplined enough. That evidence reinforces the identity. The identity generates more resistance. The cycle continues. This is not a character flaw. This is a design feature. Your system is doing exactly what it was built to do. The problem is that it is doing it in service of an identity that was constructed largely without your conscious participation, from materials you did not choose in a time of your life when you had no ability to evaluate whether those materials were accurate. I lived inside a very specific identity trap for a significant portion of my adult life. The trap had a particular shape. I was someone who understood deeply but executed poorly. Someone whose inner life was rich and whose outer life perpetually failed to match it. I had absorbed this identity from a combination of early experiences, from the way certain people in my formative years had characterized my potential and my limitations, and from my own interpretation of my repeated encounters with the wall. Every time I failed to break through, I filed the failure as evidence, and over time the evidence became the identity, and the identity became the wall. What made it especially insidious was that this identity was partially true. I did struggle with execution. I did have a pattern of insight without sustained follow-through. And because it was partially true, it felt entirely true. The mind is not always careful about the difference between a pattern and a permanent characteristic, between something you have done and something you are. You know what I realized? The most dangerous identities are not the obviously false ones. They are the ones with just enough truth in them to feel completely accurate, just enough historical evidence to make the case airtight, because those identities are nearly impossible to argue your way out of. The evidence is real, the pattern is real. And when you try to claim a different identity, when you try to say, I am someone who follows through, who executes, who breaks through walls, your system immediately retrieves the contradicting evidence. It shows you the footage. And the footage is real, and the new claim feels like wishful thinking, like self-deception, like the kind of positive affirmation that sounds good and changes nothing. This is why affirmations, as typically practiced, have such a poor track record with deep behavioral change. You cannot simply declare a new identity and expect your system to adopt it. Your system is evidence-based. It requires proof. And you cannot generate proof through declaration, only through action. But here is the cruel catch. The actions required to generate proof of the new identity are the exact actions your old identity is generating resistance to prevent. So how do you break the cycle? The answer is not to attack the identity directly. Direct attacks on identity trigger the same defensive response as direct attacks on resistance. The system doubles down, the wall thickens, the old story becomes more entrenched. The answer is something far more subtle and far more powerful. The answer is to introduce a single, genuine, undeniable piece of contradicting evidence. One real action, not a huge action, not a dramatic overhaul, but a real, specific, concrete action that your system cannot file under the old identity. One moment of genuine inconsistency with the story of your limitation, because identity is not a monolith. It is a mosaic. It is built piece by piece from individual experiences and individual interpretations of those experiences. And just as it was built piece by piece, it can be rebuilt piece by piece, one contradicting experience at a time. One moment of genuine embodied proof that a different version of you is not a fantasy but a present reality. Ask yourself right now, what is the smallest possible action you could take today that would be genuinely inconsistent with your limiting identity? Not the action that would prove you have completely transformed, the action that would introduce a single crack in the story, a single data point that your system would be forced to file under a different category. That action, small as it may seem, modest as it may appear from the outside, is not a small thing. It is a seed. And seeds, given the right conditions, do not stay small. They follow their nature. They push toward light with a force that is entirely disproportionate to their original size. The identity trap is real. It is powerful. It is the deepest fuel source your resistance has access to. But it is not permanent. It was built, and what was built by experience can be rebuilt by experience. The question is whether you are willing to begin with something small enough to actually do, and trust that small enough to actually do is exactly where all genuine transformation begins. The ground is ready. Now we talk about the rewiring. Let me be straight with you about something before we go any further. Everything we have covered so far, the architecture of resistance, the willpower myth, the 7th axiom, the identity trap, all of it is understanding. And understanding, as I said at the very beginning, is where transformation starts. But it is not where transformation lives. Transformation lives in the doing, in the daily, unglamorous, often uncomfortable practice of actually rewiring the patterns that have governed your life. And rewiring is exactly the right word, not metaphorically, literally. The neural pathways that carry your resistance, your limiting identity, your automatic retreat from the edge of your potential are physical structures. Electrochemical grooves worn deep into your nervous system through years of repetition. Every time you felt resistance and retreated, the groove deepened. Every time the wall rose and you turned back, the pathway strengthened. The retreat became easier, faster, more automatic, until it stopped feeling like a choice at all and started feeling like simply what happens. The science here is both humbling and deeply hopeful. Humbling because it explains why change is genuinely difficult. You are not fighting a mood or a habit. You are working against deeply carved physical pathways that your system has optimized over years. Hopeful because neuroplasticity, the brain's documented capacity to form new pathways, to rewire itself based on new experience, does not expire. It is not reserved for the young. It is available to you right now, today, at whatever age you are sitting with these words. The brain you have at 50 is just as capable of rewiring as the brain you had at 25. It may require more intentionality. It may require more patience. But the capacity is present and it is real. So how does the rewiring actually happen? Not theoretically, practically. What does it look like on a Tuesday morning when the resistance is present and the wall is up and the old grooves are pulling hard? It begins with what I call the recognition pause, the moment, and it is a specific, learnable, practicable moment between stimulus and response, between the arrival of resistance and your reaction to it. Viktor Frankl wrote about this space with extraordinary clarity, and his words have stayed with me for decades. In that space between stimulus and response lies our freedom. The rewiring begins in that space, not before it and not after it, precisely in it. Here is how I practice the recognition pause and how I have taught others to practice it. When resistance arrives, when you feel the heaviness, the retreat, the sudden overwhelming logic of why not right now, you do not immediately act on it. You do not push through it. You simply name it. Out loud if possible, silently if necessary. You say, resistance is here. Not I am resistant. Not I can't do this. Resistance is here. The grammatical distinction is not trivial, it is everything, because I am resistant is identity. Resistance is here, is weather, and you are not the weather, you are the one observing it. That single act of naming, that microsecond of conscious recognition, interrupts the automatic pathway. It inserts awareness into a process that previously ran entirely on autopilot. And awareness, as we established through the 7th Axiom, is the position from which you have genuine choice, not unlimited choice. The groove is still there, the pull is still real, but choice, real, available, exercisable choice. From that position of awareness, you take the second step. You get curious, not critical, curious. You ask the resistance a genuine question. What are you protecting me from right now? What specifically does my system believe is dangerous about this next action? And you listen, not for the rational answer. The rational answer is usually a red herring, a sophisticated justification constructed after the fact. You listen for the felt sense, the specific quality of the fear underneath the resistance. Where does it live in your body? What does it actually feel like? What image, what memory, what old story does it carry with it? I remember the first time I did this with genuine commitment rather than clinical detachment. I was sitting with resistance toward a piece of work that mattered enormously to me, work I had been circling for months, approaching and retreating, approaching and retreating. I named the resistance. I got curious. And what came up when I genuinely listened? was an image of a specific moment from my adolescence. A moment when I had shared something I created, something I was genuinely proud of, and the response had been dismissive in a way that landed with devastating precision. That moment had been sitting in my nervous system for over 30 years, quietly informing every subsequent act of creation with a layer of preemptive self-protection. When I saw it clearly, when I could trace the exact lineage from that old wound to today's resistance, something happened that I can only describe as a loosening, not a cure, not a complete liberation, but a loosening. Because now the resistance had a context. It was no longer a mysterious force with unlimited authority. It was a frightened memory doing its best to keep me safe from a pain that was 30 years old and no longer relevant. From that loosened state, the third step becomes possible. You make a micro-commitment, not a grand declaration. We have already established that grand declarations do not move the nervous system. A micro-commitment, the smallest possible genuine action that moves in the direction of your intention. So small that your resistance does not register it as a threat, small enough to actually do, and then you do it. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, just quietly, steadily, actually. That micro-action creates a new data point, a single thread of a new neural pathway. One experience that your system must file differently from the old pattern, and then you do it again tomorrow and the day after. Not perfectly. Perfectionism is resistance wearing its most convincing disguise, but consistently, repeatedly, with the patient, steady commitment of someone who understands that they are not fighting the old groove, they are building a new one, right alongside it. And eventually, not overnight, not in a week, but eventually the new groove becomes deeper than the old one. The new pathway becomes more automatic than the old retreat. This is the rewiring. This is what it actually looks like. Not a dramatic transformation, but a disciplined, daily, deeply human practice of choosing the new response one moment at a time, of interrupting the automatic and inserting the intentional, of building thread by thread the neural architecture of a different life. You are capable of this. Not because I am telling you so, because the science says so, because neuroplasticity is not a motivational concept, it is a biological fact. And facts, unlike feelings, do not require your belief to operate. Start where you are, with what you have, with the resistance that is present right now. Name it. Get curious. Take one micro step, then another. The path is built exactly that way, one real step at a time. Something happened before you were old enough to have a say in it. Before you could evaluate, before you could question, before you had the cognitive equipment to look at what was being handed to you and decide whether you wanted to accept it, a story was placed inside you. Not maliciously in most cases, not even consciously in almost all cases, but deliberately in the deepest sense of that word, because the people who placed it there believed it completely. And we pass on most faithfully the things we believe without question. Your parents carried a story, their parents carried one before them. And before that, stretching back through generations of people navigating survival and scarcity and the particular emotional landscape of their time and place, a lineage of stories about what is possible, what is safe, what people like us do and do not do, what we reach for and what we accept as simply beyond our kind of person. You inherited that lineage, all of it, the resilience and the limitation, the wisdom and the wound, the extraordinary capacity for love and endurance that allowed your ancestors to survive things that would have broken lesser spirits, and the particular contractions, the specific places where possibility was quietly closed off, the unspoken rules about the ceiling that applied to your family, your community, your people. I think about my own inheritance often, with gratitude and with grief in roughly equal measure, because both are honest responses to what was given to me. My father was a man of genuine intelligence and profound unexpressed potential. I say that not as a criticism, but as an observation made with deep love and a clarity that only came with time and distance. He was a man who could have built something extraordinary. I saw the capacity in him, glimpsed it in rare, unguarded moments, but who had been so thoroughly trained by his own inheritance that the ceiling of his ambition sat at a height that kept him perpetually, carefully, safely small. He did not choose this consciously. It was handed to him the same way it was handed to me, through 1,000 daily demonstrations of what was expected, what was acceptable, what was the appropriate size for a person in our position to occupy in the world. And he passed it on the same way, not through lectures or explicit instruction, but through the ambient atmosphere of our home, through what was celebrated and what was quietly discouraged, through the emotional weather that surrounded certain kinds of ambition and certain kinds of reaching. I did not know for most of my early adult life that I was carrying his ceiling as well as my own. I thought the limitations I encountered were mine, products of my personal failures, my individual weaknesses. It took me a very long time to look underneath my own story and find his, and underneath his, to find his father's, and to understand that some of what I had been calling my resistance was not even originally mine. It was inherited, pre-installed, running on my system before I had any awareness that a system existed. Ask yourself right now, and this requires genuine courage, which parts of your resistance feel personal and which parts feel ancient, which limitations carry your own emotional signature, and which carry something older, something that does not quite fit the shape of your actual life and your actual circumstances. Because some of what is holding you back began before you were born. Some of the stories generating your wall were written by people who loved you and meant you no harm and had no idea they were writing them. This matters enormously. Not because it excuses you from responsibility. Nothing in this conversation is about excusing you from responsibility. You are a grown adult with full capacity for conscious choice, and I will not insult you by suggesting otherwise. It matters because understanding the source of a story changes your relationship to it. When you discover that a limitation was inherited rather than earned, it loses a particular kind of authority. It is no longer a verdict about your nature. It is a hand-me-down that you have the right to examine and the right to keep, or the right to set down. Setting it down is not betrayal. I need to say that clearly because for many people, especially those of you whose family identity is tightly woven into the stories you carry, releasing an inherited limitation can feel like a rejection of the people who gave it to you. Like you are saying their lives were wrong. Like your expansion is a criticism of their containment. It is not. Your freedom is not a judgment on their captivity. Your reaching further is not a statement that their reach was insufficient. You are not better than the people who came before you. You are simply operating with information they did not have, in a world that offers possibilities that were genuinely not available to them, with tools for self-understanding that did not exist in their time. You are the beneficiary of their survival. Every sacrifice they made, every hardship they endured, every limitation they accepted so that you could exist in the circumstances you inhabit today, all of it was, in some profound sense, for this, for the possibility of you becoming more than the story that was handed down. That is not ingratitude. That is the purpose of inheritance, not to be replicated unchanged, but to be built upon, to be carried forward and upward, not simply sideways into the next generation. Here is what I want you to take from this section, not as a concept, but as a genuine shift in how you hold your own resistance. The next time you encounter the wall, before you conclude that it is evidence of your personal limitation, ask the older question. Ask, is this mine? Is this story, this specific belief about what is possible for me, this specific contraction around this specific kind of reaching, something I chose or something I inherited? And if the honest answer is inherited, then look at it the way you would look at any hand-me-down, with respect for where it came from, with gratitude for the love it represents. and with the clear-eyed recognition that you are allowed at any point to decide it no longer fits. The stories we inherit shaped us. They do not own us. And the moment we see them clearly enough to name them as stories, rather than facts, rather than verdicts, rather than the permanent dimensions of our possible life, we step into a freedom that no one can give us and no one can take away. That freedom is the ground beneath the moment we are about to enter together, the most important moment, the one that changes everything. Everything we have built together in this conversation, every insight, every reframe, every layer of understanding we have carefully excavated, was leading here to this, to the specific, singular, most consequential psychological space that exists in a human life. The moment before the moment. The heartbeat of time that lives between resistance and action, between the wall and the door, between the person you have been and the person you are becoming. Most people blow past this moment without knowing it exists. They experience it as discomfort, a generalized, undifferentiated discomfort that they interpret as a signal to stop rather than a signal that they are standing at the exact threshold where their life can change. They feel the heat of it and retreat. And the retreat feels so natural, so reasonable, so thoroughly justified by the intelligence of their resistance that they do not even register it as a choice. It simply happens. The way breathing happens, the way blinking happens, automatic, invisible, consequential beyond measure. I want to make that moment visible for you. I want to slow it down until you can see every component, every texture, every opportunity it contains. Because the moment before the moment is not a problem to be solved, it is a space to be inhabited, and inhabiting it consciously, deliberately, with the full presence of your aware self, is the most powerful act available to any human being. Here is what that moment actually contains, when you slow it down enough to look. First, there is the physical sensation. Resistance is never purely psychological. It always has a body, a tightening somewhere, a heaviness, a change in your breathing, in the quality of your attention, in the felt sense of your own aliveness. Most people have spent so long trying to escape this sensation that they have never actually felt it fully, never sat inside it long enough to discover that it has a shape, a texture, a specific character, and that it is survivable. Completely, totally survivable. I spent an afternoon once doing nothing but sitting with my resistance, not trying to overcome it, not trying to understand it intellectually, not trying to move through it, just sitting with it, feeling it fully, breathing into the specific places in my body where it lived, the tightness across my chest, the weight behind my sternum, the strange contracted quality in my throat. And something remarkable happened over the course of that afternoon. The sensation, which had always felt like a solid wall of discomfort, began to reveal itself as something far more dynamic. It moved, it shifted, it rose and fell and changed texture. It was not a wall at all, it was weather. And weather, as I had told myself and forgotten 100 times, always passes. That discovery, that resistance felt fully is resistance that loses its absolute authority, was worth more to me than a decade of willpower, because it changed what the moment before the moment felt like. It changed my relationship to the discomfort from threat to information, from stop signal to data, from the voice of permanent truth to the voice of temporary weather. Second, inside that moment, there is a story running. There is always a story running. The story is fast, sophisticated, and sounds exactly like you because it is built from your vocabulary, your experiences, your particular brand of self-protective intelligence. It says things like, "This is not the right time. You are not quite ready. One more day of preparation will make all the difference. The conditions are not optimal. What if you try and it confirms your worst fear about yourself?" The story is not lying exactly, it is selecting. It is presenting the evidence for retreat with prosecutorial skill while quietly suppressing the evidence for advance. Knowing the story is running, simply knowing it, simply being able to say there is a story here and it is not the totality of reality, creates space. The same space Viktor Frankl described, the space where freedom lives. You do not have to refute the story point by point. You do not have to win an argument with your own resistance. You simply have to recognize that a story is present, that you are not obligated to act on it, and that you have in this precise moment a genuine choice. Third, and this is where the 7th axiom becomes not just a concept but a lived experience. Inside the moment, before the moment, there is always a version of you that is already on the other side, already through, already living in the reality that exists beyond the wall. You can feel this version if you are quiet enough, if you are present enough. It is not a fantasy, it is a genuine aspect of your psychology, what some researchers call your possible self. The self that is not yet fully actualized but is genuinely biologically real as a potential. That version of you is not waiting for perfect conditions. It is not waiting for the resistance to disappear. It is simply on the other side, having made the choice, having taken the step, having occupied the moment before the moment and moved through it. Your job, the only job that matters in that space, is to let that version of you cast the deciding vote. Not the frightened version, not the storytelling version, not the version that has memorized every previous failure and organized them into a compelling case for staying still. The version that knows, that has always known, that has been pressing against the wall from the other side for as long as you have been pressing against it from this side. Let me tell you what happens when you do this. When you actually inhabit the moment before the moment with full presence and conscious choice and the steady authority of your aware self, not every time because no one does it every time, but with increasing frequency, with growing skill and confidence, the moment itself begins to change. It gets shorter. The gap between resistance and action narrows. The story still runs, but you stop being its most captivated audience. The physical discomfort is still present, but it no longer carries the authority of a verdict. It carries the familiar, almost companionable feeling of a threshold you have crossed before and will cross again. And eventually, this is the truth I want to leave you with from this section, eventually the moment before the moment becomes something you recognize not with dread but with a particular kind of quiet excitement, because you know what it means. It means you are at the edge. It means something real is available. It means the wall is present because something worth protecting is on the other side. And you have learned, slowly, painstakingly, one moment at a time, that the wall is not the end of the story. It is precisely where the story gets interesting. Step into it. The moment is waiting. It has always been waiting, and you have everything you need to meet it. Nobody warns you about this part. Everyone talks about the breath-through, the moment of finally moving through the wall, finally taking the step, finally choosing the forward motion over the familiar retreat. That moment gets celebrated, mythologized, turned into the climax of every transformation story ever told, and it deserves celebration. It is real, and it is earned, and it matters profoundly. But nobody tells you what comes next. And what comes next is something I wish someone had prepared me for, because when it happened to me the first time I genuinely broke through a wall I had been facing for years, I was completely unprepared for the experience. I expected euphoria. Sustained, unambiguous, confirming euphoria. The feeling of having arrived, of the struggle being definitively over. What I felt instead was something far stranger and far more interesting, a kind of spaciousness, a quiet, almost disorienting openness where the familiar pressure had been. Like a room you have lived in for years suddenly having a wall removed. The light and air that flood in are wonderful, genuinely wonderful, but the room feels unfamiliar. You keep reaching for the wall and finding only space, and space, however liberating, takes some getting used to. This is important for you to understand because many people experience this disorientation after a genuine breakthrough and misread it as evidence that something has gone wrong. The resistance returns. It always returns in some form because it is part of your protective architecture and it does not simply retire, and they interpret its return as proof that the breakthrough was not real, that they have failed again, that the wall rebuilt itself overnight. The wall did not rebuild itself. What happened is that you entered new territory, and new territory generates new forms of resistance. This is not failure, it is progress. You have moved far enough forward that the resistance has had to find a new position. That is not a setback. That is evidence of genuine movement. What actually happens after you break through, when you stay with it, when you continue showing up, when you keep applying the 7th axiom with patience and with practice, is a gradual, cumulative, profoundly real expansion of what feels possible. Not just in the specific area where you broke through, but across your life, because the nervous system is holistic. The genuine experience of self-trust in one area radiates into others. The knowledge that you can meet the moment before the moment and choose forward rather than retreat does not stay contained. It spreads. It changes the atmosphere of your inner life. It changes what you reach for and what you accept and what you are willing to ask of yourself and of the world. That is the life on the other side of the wall. Not perfect, not without resistance or difficulty or the ordinary heartbreak that belongs to every human life, but larger, freer, more genuinely, fully, unapologetically yours. And that life is not a reward for the exceptional. It is available right now, today, to anyone willing to learn the knowledge required to bypass the wall. So here we are, you and me, at the end of this conversation and the beginning of everything it was pointing toward. There is something I want to ask of you. Not a promise made to me. I will not be there when the wall rises again and the story runs and the resistance finds its most compelling disguise. What I am asking for is a covenant made with yourself, with the aware, watching, undefeatable part of you that has been present through every storm your life has produced and has never, not once, not for a single moment, actually abandoned you. The covenant is simple. It has no complicated terms, no performance metrics, no conditions that can be failed or forgotten. It is this: when the wall rises, you will pause before you retreat. You will name what is present. You will remember that you are the observer, not the observed. That you are the awareness in which resistance arises, not the resistance itself. And from that position, even briefly, even imperfectly, even with the old story still running in the background, you will take one genuine step, not a perfect step, not a heroic step, one real step, taken consciously from the position of your aware self rather than the position of your fear. That is the entire covenant. That is the 7th axiom in practice, distilled to its most essential and most actionable form. Here is what I know about you, though we have never met. You would not still be here at this point in this conversation if there were not something in you that is ready, something that recognized itself in these words, something that has been waiting, not passively, but with a kind of fierce, quiet, patient readiness for permission, for the specific knowledge that makes moving forward not just desirable but genuinely possible. Consider this your permission. Consider this your knowledge. You have everything you need. The wall is not the end of your story. It is the most interesting part of it. Walk toward it. Name it. Step through. The life you are meant to live is already waiting on the other side.